Okay, a small but enthusiastic crowd. I like it. I like it. We are, yeah, it's been an exciting day, and I'm Rear Admiral retired from the U.S. Coast Guard, Pete Brown. I am a fellow with the Western Hemisphere Initiative of America First Policy Institute, and we're here to discuss the future of Caribbean security. My panelists are Rear Admiral, retired, U.S. Coast Guard, Mark Fedor. He's the former director of the Joint Interagency Task Force, Counter-Drug Task Force, based in Key West, Florida. Art Garfer, Brigadier General in National Guard and the Secretary of Public Safety for Puerto Rico and the Homeland Security Advisor to the Governor of Puerto Rico. And then my colleague Andres Martinez Fernandez, he's the Heritage Foundation's Senior Analyst for Latin America Policy. And so we're going to be discussing the future of Caribbean security in the context of this administration and the national security strategy. So the administration's national security strategy, the Department of War's subordinate national defense strategy, and the Department of State's strategic plan all point to the value, both to the United States and to the region, of increased U.S. attention to the Western Hemisphere. And the document also asserts the Don Roe doctrine of denying extra-hemispheric control of key resources, facilities, and terrain by adversarial regimes or their proxies. The strategies also, I think very wisely, elevate America's economic and commercial interests and power to equal footing with military and diplomatic influence, one of the best features of the current administration as compared with all others, even the Trump 45 administration in which I worked. And further, these strategies offer renewed bilateral and multilateral relationships to achieve shared goals of regional security, stability, and prosperity. And as we heard from the podium earlier today, it's America first, not America alone. So in 2025 and then continuing into 2026, the Caribbean has seen heightened U.S. activity, including Secretary Rubio's first overseas trip, which came less than 1 month into his tenure, military operations Southern Spear and Absolute Resolve, primary and secondary sanctions against the illegitimate Venezuelan regime's oil trade, substantial impact on Cuba there, followed up with the Shield of the Americas Summit and the establishment of the Americas Counter-Cartel Coalition, the AC3. Supporters, both domestic and regional, view this as an America first, not America alone hemispheric security policy. And so I'm gonna start at the end here with Andres. As I mentioned, he's the Heritage Foundation's Senior Analyst for Latin American Policy within the Allison Center for National Security. He's a seasoned and serious analyst and author. He wrote Heritage Foundation's recent Caribbean Security Strategy Report and the Latin America and Caribbean section of the 2026 Index of Military Strength. So, Andres, can you give us just an opening minute or two on what you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities in the region, given current threats and environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenges that we have are not going to surprise anyone. It's narco trafficking, the proliferation of narco-terrorist organizations, the weakening of institutions and capacities of local governments, regional governments to confront those challenges, and the movement also, particularly for the United States, of malign extra-hemispheric actors in in Latin America in particular, and that very much is rising as a concern as we see potentials for a future conflict with China, for example, where what will the Chinese control of ports or other critical infrastructure within our hemisphere, what will that mean and how will that be leveraged by China? And I think you see that interest of China and these other actors continue as far as what's going on in our hemisphere, what their capacities are in their hemisphere. That came out recently that the Chinese had hacked into the Cuban embassy to apparently monitor what the discussions were with the United States. And there's a reason that they're so interested in that. They see the Western Hemisphere as a strategic venue for their capacities against the United States, and they want to preserve that. So those are really serious challenges. Looking forward, the opportunities are very substantial, because this administration, the Trump administration, is so engaged and recognizes the outsized impact that the Western Hemisphere and the developments in the region have on the American people. And that's something that for many administrations in the past has not been something they recognized. And the consequences have been the decay of the security situation, the arrival of these extra-hemispheric actors, and the decay of U.S. influence. But with this really concerted attention that this administration is bringing to the Western Hemisphere, we, I think, are able to do quite a bit as far as undoing the damage that we've seen over the past several years.
Great. Well, thank you for that, and we're gonna dig deep into all those issues. Okay, I mentioned that Art Garfer is Puerto Rico's Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security Advisor to Governor Jennifer Gonzalez Colon. Art also serves as Brigadier General in the National Guard at the pinnacle of a 30-plus year career in special operations, both in the regular Army and in the National Guard. So, Art, if you could give us a minute or two on your views of what's happening in the Caribbean of late.
I would say we got to remember that the Caribbean is just more about the island chain. It's about every nation, right, that borders the Caribbean Sea, and the Caribbean Basin. So one of the things coming from my experience in Special Forces and SOF is the irregular warfare and hybrid elements that have taken place in the Americas since 9/11. As the war on terror geared up in September 11 of 2001, the United States and every administration since took their eye off its backyard. And other actors, near-peer competitors and narco-terrorists moved into that space and exploited it, and have exploited it. We saw a resurgence of 22 nations that joined a socialist organization known as El ALBA. Right now there's 21. Milei very smartly pulled Argentina out of it. The Caribbean, many of these small islands are still members of ALBA, for example. So this administration, thankfully, has come on board, realized there's a threat to the homeland. Puerto Rico being the most southern border that the United States has, it's flag territory. We were on the forefront of that since 9/11. Right now, we are still at that forefront and finally going on the offensive since late last year, and with current military operations. As well, in conjunction with CBP and other DHS and other federal agencies, we have disrupted significantly the flow of narcotics through Puerto Rico to the mainland, to the point where some of these cartels are having to ship narcotics to Europe and then find ways to cross it from Europe across the Atlantic back to the U.S. via Canada. So that puts a strain on them, economic strain. So that's a bit there of that irregular aspect as well. But thankfully it took this administration coming back into office to realize that, number one, the threat to the homeland is the Caribbean, it is the Americas, and how do we consolidate and how do we prevent that from continuing to fester in the hemisphere. So there's a lot of fertile room for growth now on this. There's a lot of room in various different areas to be exploited in order to continue to deny, reduce, and disrupt the capabilities of our near-peer competitors, as well as narco-terrorists and other players in the region.
Great. Thank you, Art. And Mark Fedor recently retired from the U.S. Coast Guard as Rear Admiral after an illustrious 35-year career, combining over a decade of at-sea law enforcement experience, including 3 command-at-sea assignments, and as director of the Joint Interagency and International Counter-Drug Task Force Jayada South. He's now a Senior Director of Programs in the Mission Technology Division of Huntington Ingalls Industries, one of the top 10 U.S. aerospace and defense contractors. Mark, your initial thoughts?
Oh, Pete, thank you. And Andres and Art, it's a pleasure to be up here with you. And thanks, everyone, for being here. So I'll start off by saying I love sports, but I hate playing chase. And for the past 35 years, it seemed like as a nation, we've been chasing these cartels, and we're always been a step behind. They used to fly airplanes over the Bahamas and drop drugs. We countered that. They started using Go Fast. We learned how to shoot the engines out, stopping that. Use drug submarines. We figured that out. But again, always one step ahead. And I think as a nation, we're really at an inflection point now, because I think as you read the national security strategy, national defense strategy, the priority is on the Western Hemisphere and dismantling transnational criminal organizations and providing Southcom, the Congress is going to have something to say about this, but providing Southcom with the resources that they need to get the mission done. That's unprecedented for folks like us who have been around in a little while. So I think there's an opportunity to stop chasing and maybe be a little predictive and get ahead of our adversary. And I would just put 3 things out there quickly. We could talk more about them later, but from my perspective operationally, I think there's 3 things you really need to do. First, we need to modernize our detection and monitoring capabilities from the seabed to space. Second is data. We talked about intelligence a lot in the last conference, the El Mencho one, and I don't think it's so much an intelligence problem. There's a lot of intelligence. It's a data integration problem. And data is the coin of the realm. And whoever can systematically collect it, aggregate it, process it, exploit it, and disseminate it will have a decision-making advantage over their adversary. But you need to do it in real time. It needs to be across domains, across jurisdictions, and then we can move a little faster. And then the third thing is empowering our partner nations. We have some willing and very capable partner nations, some more than others, but we need to give them the tools so that they can assume some of the burden off of us and be true partners in this fight. So very happy to be here again and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, those are great subjects, and we'll dig into them all. We're going to go back down to the end, though, and start with Andres. And I'll set it up this way. Nicolas Maduro didn't apparently read or heed the messages that were sent, implicit and explicit, verbal and nonverbal, that were sent toward him by the Trump administration throughout 2025. What do you think of the impact of the messages transmitted, for example, through comments in the drug trafficking majors list toward Colombia and Mexico has been, and Cuba too? How has their behavior and rhetoric changed, if at all, after seeing what happened to Maduro?
Yeah, well, I think we have to, when we're looking at messaging, we have to, again, recognize the disengagement that the U.S. has had with the Western Hemisphere for years and years, decades. And the reality is that there was not a credible, for decades, there wasn't a credible level of engagement from the United States, whether it's with partners and allies or in confronting many of the adversaries which have built up a foothold, and whether it's in Venezuela or Cuba or elsewhere, there really wasn't a sense from these adversaries that the United States is actually going to act on rhetoric or confront these threats in any serious way. And I think that's why it's so crucial that first with the boat strikes that we saw with, last year in the Caribbean, the Trump administration showing the region, showing these adversaries that the United States and these narco-terrorist organizations that the United States is going to act in its defense, in defending the American people and confronting these threats. The Trump administration, President Trump, took that to the next level with the capture of Nicolas Maduro. And I think that's an important signal, not only to the rest of the regime's remnants in Venezuela, but to the region more broadly. And we've seen the push in Colombia, for example, to press President Petro to act in a forward-leaning manner in confronting those narco-trafficking threats that are really substantial. We've seen that in Mexico to a significant degree as well, and now with Cuba, the United States and the Trump administration is really relying on this credibility that it's built up with following through on these actions and in defense of the American people. And I think that's a crucial tool that we now have by kind of dismissing this vision and this kind of haze of U.S. Rhetoric, which is not backed up by action. Now these adversaries know the reality. These organizations, these narco-terrorist organizations as well, they're having to respond, and so are these actors. And I think that's why we're seeing. I think there's a lot of challenges in Cuba with respect to the path there and those talks, but certainly even the level of responsiveness that we're seeing with that and in other examples, I think is a testament to the action and the follow-through that the Trump administration has shown thus far.
Okay, thank you for that, and you get $1 for being the first to mention the boat strikes, because everybody's going to end up talking about it here. And so I'm going to go to Art, and I'm actually starting with that. So Operation Southern Spear, the boat strikes, and absolute resolve to capture Maduro relied on significant reactivation of dormant or near dormant bases and facilities in Puerto Rico with the explicit and very public support of the governor, who appeared alongside Secretary Hegseth and others in supporting the troops involved in those missions. Please share your view of Puerto Rico's significance in enabling the success of those operations and the possibilities of future development and employment that could be catalyst to both U.S. security and to the economy of Puerto Rico.
Sure. I'll start by saying that June, July last year, I had the opportunity with the Heritage Foundation and with Christian Broadcast Network to be able to start the public campaign of expressing what the near-peer competitors were doing in the region and how Puerto Rico could play into this. That was followed up quickly with a series of visits to key personnel at the White House, National Security Council, and others here in D.C. They were not aware of the level of the threat in the region. Shortly thereafter, the governor tapped me to be the point of contact in order to start moving in conjunction with DOD at the time, now DOW, to start moving forces into the region. The governor, like Pete said, very publicly supported, and we all, the administration, took it to heart to support as Americans and in support of our national security interests, that of the President of the United States. Puerto Rico, very adaptly, we were able to start facilitating, once again, the reactivation and use of Ramey Air Force Base on the western side of the island. It's got the largest airfield in the Caribbean. The second was Rosie Road Naval Air Station on the eastern side of the island, which has one of the deepest ports in the Caribbean, one of the 3 deep ports in Puerto Rico, in conjunction with one of the largest airfields as well. So it was able to quickly allow a platform for our nation and for DOW to establish different variants of aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft, rotary-wing aircraft, and unmanned aerial aircraft as well. In conjunction with that, we were able to facilitate the 22nd MEU ability to deploy to the region, and later on the USS Ford and its carrier group as well. So Puerto Rico very much became the platform from which Southern Spear and Absolute Resolve were launched from. Currently, we still have forces in Puerto Rico, both from the MEU, the Air Force, and now there's potentially going to be a 3-star command, Joint Command Headquarters, move into Puerto Rico as well. So that shows clearly what the administration's importance of Puerto Rico is to this endeavor in the region. On that note, we are also currently pursuing how do we support our national interests in the sense of what is our development of our sustained logistical programs within a nation long term. And I think I can talk about that later, but just to give you a quick heads up, if we do go to war with China, we're going to need to have a strategic rear for logistical support and continuing to build critical infrastructure and nodes that will be required for continued conflict with the People's Republic of China. So these are some of the vectors that we're taking a look at. But yes, it was a very quick ramp up. It's still ongoing. As recently as 48 hours ago, another narco-terrorist boat was sunk in the Caribbean, and there was another one sunk off the coast of Colombia. So this is a continuing operation. And it's more than welcomed by the administration in Puerto Rico in conjunction in supporting the president's views.
Thanks for that, Art. And from a kind of a maritime time, speed, distance standpoint, Southern Spear and Absolute Resolve are basically ship-based operations, and it's one day from being in port in Puerto Rico to being in tactically operating position off of either Colombia or Venezuela from Puerto Rico versus 5 days from Mayport or a week from Norfolk, the next closest Navy bases. So the tactical advantage gained by operating from Puerto Rico, just absolutely priceless to the operation that was done, and also helped maintain the operational security, taking Maduro completely by surprise. So thanks to that and the governor for supporting it. So Mark, your chance to talk about Southern Spear and boat strikes. And there's been a lot of talk about the legality of lethal strikes against drug trafficking vessels. The administration asserts that they're narco-terrorists attacking the U.S. and our citizens essentially as proxy militias executing missions that serve adversarial regimes and affiliated or complicit paramilitary terrorist organizations. So for the purposes of this question, let's assume that all that's true and that the strikes are legal. When we get to audience Q&A, there may be a different opinion, and we can handle that. So what's your assessment on the practical impact, the deterrent value, and as you already alluded to, the partner nation operational relationships that Operation Southern Spear has had so far?
Yeah. No, and it's a great topic. And as a military officer, and I think we'd all say the same thing. Once the president designates one of these organizations as a terrorist organization, it unleashes a host of authorities, and that's really what you need to have from a military perspective to execute the mission. So that's that from a military perspective. Now, backing up a little bit and thinking about it strategically, if the ultimate goal is to dismantle these transnational criminal organizations, which I think it is, then we really need to think about when is it appropriate that we want to do a kinetic strike on a vessel and have it go away, and when do you want to take law enforcement action to maybe bring those people into the U.S. legal system, those smugglers off the boat into the U.S. legal system? It needs to be a conscious decision with the end in mind of we want to dismantle this organization. So if you know that this boat is connected to another organization, maybe you want to do law enforcement on that so you can bring those people in, interview them, see what kind of intelligence you can get from them. And then the other side of it is these boats, for as rudimentary as they are, if you see some of these boats, they're open hull construction, about 30 feet long, 3 or 4 individuals in there. But when they're out there, they have cell phones, they have satellite phones, they have GPS, they usually have a couple of phone numbers in their pockets. That is tremendously valuable intelligence. And so when you make that interdiction, if you can take that information and quickly exploit it, get it back into the targeting cycle as quickly as possible, you might be able to find the next contact in the water, or the next target on the water. And when I was in uniform, I thought about, if you're familiar with what General McChrystal did in the mid-2000s, we were fighting Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and he came up with a program called F3EA. Find, fix, finish, exploit, and analyze. And what that was is he sent his special forces folks around, I'm sure Art's very familiar with this, they would go into the caves and however the finish was, but if they could capture the people, more important was the information, was the computers, the laptops, the phones, and then rapidly, in real time, exploitation of that so fast that it was getting to the point where that same SEAL team or Rangers or whoever they were would go to another target that same night. That's when you're starting to move faster than the adversary, and you can really get ahead of their decision-making cycle and put them on the defensive instead of us. So I think keeping that end state in mind of, hey, we want to dismantle these organizations, then when is it appropriate to do kinetic? When is it appropriate to do law enforcement? And making that conscious decision.
Those are all great points. And one of my longtime criticisms of the methodology that we used was almost every case was funneling toward a U.S. federal Department of Justice-led prosecution, which is not in itself a bad thing, but it creates a funnel of information that is closed, and that information doesn't get back out into the field in the way that you described. the documentation of the past year, including a 5 February 2005 memo, encouraged DOJ's prosecutors to make a more balanced decision and to consider the availability of non-criminal activities, including boat strikes, as one possible outcome rather than a DOJ prosecution. And then the other thing I'll point out is that just this week, the White House released the National Drug Control Strategy, and among the specific actions and measures of effectiveness is a doubling of the number of these digital exploitation at sea cases where Coast Guard teams on the most sophisticated cutters can rapidly analyze cell phones and other electronics to get that information analyzed and into the system as quickly as possible. It was very encouraging to see that. So Andres, now I want to go to you, and I know that this question doesn't have a single answer. I mean, we have 34 next-door neighbors just in the Caribbean alone, but what's been the public, press, and political reception of the first year of the administration, the boat strikes, the Maduro situation, the Shield of the Americas Summit, the Counter-Cartel Coalition? So much activity. How is it being received downrange?
Yeah, I think in general, it's been overwhelmingly positive, and that's not only, certainly there are agitators, and there's a far left movement within Latin America, which is going to be very much opposed to the U.S. being active in Latin America. But when we look at the situation that President Trump's kind of refocus on the Western Hemisphere, what that was looking like, it was crisis in Ecuador, where once peaceful country was now in the wave of narco violence. Haiti on the brink, 100,000 dead Americans from fentanyl every year. And the cartels more powerful than ever. Colombia, a similar situation there with the empowerment of those narco guerrillas, and the mass migration crisis. The Tren de Aragua, which not only affected the United States, but cities across Latin America. And the people in Latin America, I think, got a full view of what the policies of the left, which is in much of Latin America, was generating these conditions, but also the disengagement of the United States with these security threats, and the consequences were chaos and crisis. I think that's why you saw there was ahead of this operation that President Trump did to capture Nicolas Maduro, there was actually a majority, polling showing that a majority of Latin Americans wanted the U.S. military to confront the Maduro regime, because they were dealing with the consequences of that regime. And now you see, I think, that a positive view of U.S. engagement being continued to be revealed through elections across Latin America, where you have voters voting into office, conservative, pro-U.S. leaders that run many times on an explicit platform of engaging with the United States, alignment with the United States and the Trump administration. And I think that's as clear a message as you can get as to the way the voters in Latin America, citizens in Latin America, and political leadership in the region sees in a very positive way this engagement of the United States. There's this a history with many countries of engaging with China because of the economic opportunities there as well. But I think because that offering that China offers is at the end of the day, it's a false offering, but also B, because of just the alignment culturally, economically, and politically that much of Latin America has with the United States. The U.S. is the natural and preferred partner, and you hear that time and time again when you engage with officials in the region. And I think we're finally seeing what that looks like when the U.S. reciprocates and seizes on that. And we've seen that with these actions that the military strikes, but also with these gatherings and engagement directly with leaders, heads of state, the Counter Cartel Conference, the being Shielded Americas being one of those opportunities, but also just one-on-one meetings with President Trump and different heads of state, whether President of Honduras, President of Ecuador, El Salvador. These are engagements that you never saw under the Biden administration at any significant degree, and they're recurring. There's multiple engagements, and there's real progress being brought to bear that also benefits the region with as a result of those meetings and as a result of that engagement.
And it's a common feature across the globe that when the countries that are closest to the threat are the ones that like America the most. So in Europe, the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and Hungary, they're on our team. In the Caribbean, Grenada, Trinidad, Tobago, Guyana, they all love us. In Asia, Japan and South Korea love us. That's a sign that we're on the right team here. So, Art, speaking of adversary action, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands present both opportunity and risk. Venezuela, being the most acute, but infiltration of our neighbors, especially economically and politically smaller island nations that are vulnerable because of their kind of poor resourcing. Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, Dominica, they're vulnerable to this kind of diplomatic and economic penetration by China. What's your and the governor's perspective on the ability of Puerto Rico to push back against that and then to project positive American influence in the region, particularly to the east?
I mean, Puerto Rico is the United States. This is our nation. And we are that, if we want to call it, that aircraft carrier in the Caribbean from which we can project our national interests. And that's what the governor wants to do. And right now, if you look at, you mentioned Antigua and Barbuda, we're talking about $1.8 billion Chinese investment. It is a Chinese economic free zone, and there were Chinese Coast Guard cutters there. So this is in Jamaica, you're talking about $1 billion of Chinese investment, state investment. When I'm talking investment, I'm talking about state investment. There's other islands as well, dual-use seaport that was being built in Haiti as well. You've got sister cities between Dominican Republic and China, for example. One of the largest diasporas right now for Russians is in the Caribbean. It is in Domrep and it is in Nicaragua. All right, so there's a reason for this, and they have penetrated the region. I think now, if you noticed since the Maduro, event, all they offer now is rhetoric. They've understood very clearly that once again the United States has become the preeminent power in the hemisphere. They've taken, and they're moving to take back the backyard, to put attention in the Americas and in the Western Hemisphere. And now we're affecting their national security interests, which were not necessarily in the Caribbean. So they're having to pull back. They're having to reassess. They are seriously looking at, in Russia's case, Ukraine, the High North. In China's case, they're looking back now at the South China Sea, Taiwan, the High North. So it is definitely in the interest of the administration to continue to project from Puerto Rico in conjunction with the assets that we can afford into the region, that American preeminence. Remember, Puerto Rico has for over 500 years has been fought over, right? We had the Spaniards for 500 years, then we had the Brits try and come in, we had the Dutch try and come in, and eventually now, the United States, we've been the United States for 125 years. And now in July, we celebrate our 250 years. So it is important for Puerto Rico to continue to be that part and that projection power into the Caribbean, and obviously, as I mentioned earlier, be that platform, be that carrier in the region to continue to push the president's vision of what he needs, and also for Puerto Rico to be that center of gravity for the NDS, the NSS, and also the national drug policy as well. And now the counter-terrorist policy just came out as well. So
mercifully much shorter than the counter-drug policy.
Yes. And I just wanted to add, very interesting, Lula's in town. There's a reason for this. It's tied to Cuba, the backdoor channels. So I think as Cuba opens, Puerto Rico will play a bigger role into the greater Caribbean Basin as well. There's a lot of fertile ground for the for our nation to continue to employ Puerto Rico accordingly.
Great, and we used to call Puerto Rico the crossroads of the Caribbean, and certainly was that operationally in the 80s and 90s, and then kind of post-Cold War and base shutdown, it kind of became what I call the cul-de-sac of the Caribbean. Kind of stuff went in, but not much came out of it. So it'd be great to see it return to that position of projecting both hard and soft power as well as economic influence. Mark, I want to shift a little bit farther west to Cuba and the Bahamas. Interestingly, in an earlier panel about Cuba, one of the panelists mentioned the very specific geographic vulnerability that Cuba, and I would argue the Bahamas as well, presents. Florida has 3 COCOMs, Southcom, CENTCOM, and SOCOM, as well as the Joint Interagency Task Force South, as well as the vast majority of our nation's military, government, and commercial space activity launching out of Canaveral, generally to the southeast, right over the Bahamas. That creates an intel collection vulnerability to the United States that's been exploited for over 60 years by the Soviets and Russia in Cuba, and now the Chinese building a SIGINT facility in Cuba, the Chinese with significant economic and electronic developments in the Bahamas, they add to that vulnerability. What can and should the United States be doing to push back against that and to become better partners, better neighbors with the Bahamas and with a future government in Cuba?
No, thanks, Pete. So just a little bit of bureaucratic background just to show you sometimes we're our own worst enemy with how we deal with these things. So Southcom's territory includes Cuba, Hispaniola, which is Haiti, Domret, but then it dips south around Puerto Rico and then includes the other islands. So Northcom has responsibility for Puerto Rico and the Bahamas. Add to that further complication, as I sat at JIATF South, I worked for the Southcom commander, but my organizational responsibility went up through the Bahamas and included Mexico as well. So if I wanted to do something with the Bahamas, because there was certainly drug smuggling there, I had to not only work with my 4-star boss at Southcom, but then the Northcom commander too. So it just complicated things overall. So just to give you that lay of the land. I'll talk about each of these specific individually. Cuba. It's been a thorn in certainly our side for as long as we've been in the service. Again, 90 miles off of Key West, a repressive regime. I've gotten to know many Cuban Americans in Miami, great people. They want nothing more than a lot of them to go back to their homeland, reclaim some territory. I hope it does change here in the future because it does present a threat. The irony of the threat is, Pete mentioned, lots of intelligence things going on there, but from a drug smuggling perspective, it is a bit of a black hole. Even the drug smugglers won't go to Cuba all the time because if they get caught there, they're never going to be seen again. And so you don't see a whole lot of drugs coming in and out of Cuba. So that's one thing. The other interesting part about it is the U.S. Coast Guard is probably one of the few entities in the federal government that almost has daily communications with the Cubans, specifically the Cuban Border Guard. And they let us know when a migrant vessel is leaving, because they're not going to try to stop it. They're going to let it go, and we will try to interdict those folks. They'll even tell us about drug vessels that they think are coming around Cuba. So we certainly need to be prepared. We have that relationship out of necessity, but it's nothing more than that. It's purely a transactional, it's a one-way kind of or back and forth communication, but it's specific on the areas of interest to them. They want us to interdict their people at sea and bring them back, and that's how it works. We don't have a whole lot of other insight into what else is going on in the island and how we could work with a future regime that might be there, a future leadership team, I should say, that could be there. But we have to be able to do that. That is absolutely critical because it's so close to where we are. And if you look at Cuba and think about how long that coastline is, when they do open up, that could be a smuggler's paradise there because it's a long, long coastline, and it would be tough to police from there. And I had I did go to Havana as part of a professional exchange there. It's a beautiful country. You could see why, if you were a real estate developer, why you'd want to get in there and work with them, and they could really become a tropical paradise. So there's some challenges there. On the Bahamian side, that one scares me more than anything. I think Pete it's about 45 miles from the closest point in Bahamas to South Florida, just about Mar-a-Lago area, from Bimini there, and there are hundreds of boats going back and forth all the time. And so when you try to look at it from a maritime domain awareness perspective and how do you stop smuggling from going back and forth, it's like trying to find a needle among a pack of needles because it is nonstop and you're trying to filter that out. So two things work in our favor is the Bahamas has provided the United States with probably the most permissive bilateral agreement that exists. U.S. Coast Guard vessels can go into their territorial waters and execute law enforcement operations with notification to their government. I mean, you think about that. In their territorial waters with notification to conduct law enforcement. I mean, that's a pretty solid agreement right there to do that. The other positive that we've had is over the years, there's been a lot of Homeland Security grants that have gone to local authorities in Florida. And I'll highlight the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office. They actually took a lot of those grants, created a radar system, and they can look out into the Florida Straits, and they have a lot more granularity than we ever had at what traffic is coming across and to help filter out, hey, why isn't that person squawking their AIS, just an identification kind of signal as they're coming in. So it's really illuminated that area. We need to do more on that front. Again, scary. Bahamas, about 150 countries, I think, can go in there without a visa. And you think about who's there. We know there's a huge Chinese presence there. It wouldn't take much for a bunch of bad people to go into the Bahamas and make their way across to Florida. And that scares the heck out of me. And so, again, more maritime domain awareness capabilities. And, again, that intelligence cycle. As you do make those interdictions, who are you? Who are you working with? Who are you talking to? And feed that back into our own targeting and domain awareness cycle, I'd say.
We're going to get to audience Q&A, but I got one more question I have to get to Art before we do that. And Art, this one concerns, you talked about national security strategy, national defense strategy, counter-drug strategy. One of the other administration documents that came out last year was the Maritime Action Plan to revive our maritime industrial base and maritime economy. And there are some specific things in there that I think that present opportunity for Puerto Rico, including maritime prosperity zones, UAS and autonomous systems testing areas and things like that, and an interaction with industrial space uses. So what is the future that you, the governor, and the team in Puerto Rico see as the potential for Puerto Rico in this way to become a zone of the maritime industrial base for the country?
As I mentioned earlier, we're positioning Puerto Rico in order to be that strategic logistical rear for the United States and also our military complex as well. I'll talk a minute here about the maritime side of the house. We do have dry docks in Puerto Rico. One of them right now, which is in San Juan, is actually operational. We have another dry dock in Rosie Roads, much bigger. It takes a couple of $1 billion to outfit. We do have private investors that are interested in that. So we are working in that direction. What does that do? It gives our Navy, our Coast Guard, and our merchant marine the capability to be able to refit, fix, refurbish ships on the go and not have to wait for one of two critical ports in the United States to open up, and they get in line and wait, and that way we can maintain our op tempo and our ability to keep our ships and boats at sea. So that's number one. Number two, moving into the space domain, we are in talks. If you look at Space Force, they are overstretched for launch capacities. So what are two things you need? One, you got to be somehow near the equator, and number two, you need to be surrounded by water. So we checked those two blocks, and we are in talks with that. And as it pertains to other types of technology development, we are in talks with one of the defense agencies in order to bring them to the island. They're very interested in it and continue to develop their R&D out of Puerto Rico. So we are exploring these. These are things that are on the table. They are moving forward, and there is a committee that's been created by the governor, and the governor has been leaning extremely forward on this. And she's tasked us and also Sebastian at the Economic Development Office and so forth to start putting together this plan and start executing. And I think this allows our national security the ability to remain flexible, adaptable, and also be able to counter preemptively any types of threats that could become global. And better position itself.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. And thank you all for answering the easy questions. Now we're going to go to audience Q&A, las pelotas duras. Vengan.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yes, yes. My name is Astrid Hager. I live in Boston, and I'm a supporter not only of Heritage, but American First Policy Institute. So I have two questions. First one, hybrid warfare has converged in Latin America since before the 1980s, starting with Chavez signing over 300 agreements with Ahmadinejad and bringing Hezbollah operatives into the tri-border area since before the 1980s, causing the AMIA attack in Argentina, and also currently there are still Hezbollah cells roaming in Latin America. If we add to that the fact that Venezuela was the only Latin American country in possession of armed Iranian drones, I don't believe any other Latin American country was in possession of drones. We're just 1,500 nautical miles from Miami. So this has been happening now for several decades. And to add to all of that, we have illicit fishing taking place throughout South America, depleting the oceans in Latin America. And on top of that, there's a spy Chinese facility in Patagonia, Cuba, and in different areas, plus the aggressive investment, Chinese investment in Peru and the ports in several areas of Latin America. So my question to you is, what was the change? I understand President Trump, Secretary Marco Rubio, but because academics call this benign negligence, the last several decades of American indifference, North American indifference to Latin America, academics say, well, it's just benign negligence. Yeah, but there were no, Latin America didn't have all their diplomatic embassies or consulates. The diplomats were not even appointed for several decades in several countries in Latin America. So what was really the pivot? What caused it to be? What caused the Navy to come to the Caribbean and extract Maduro from Venezuela, which, by the way, Venezuelans are very grateful, and they are so happy that this happened, and they welcome America to the Caribbean and to Venezuela as well. I just needed to say that. So that's question number one. Question number two, President Trump went from talking about American first to the Americas first. And he often refers to Venezuela as the 51st state for the United States. And now they call it a protectorate to the United States. So there's a new realignment in the hemisphere, and I find it fascinating. So I would like your comments on these two questions. Thank you.
Sure. I'll start off with the second question. Puerto Rico is the 51st state, so Venezuela can get in line, and Canada, and a couple of others. So we'll start off with that. But but to get to the what led to this. Well, we got fed up of being the punching bag. And I say again, since September 11, 2001, we took our eye off the ball. We started to focus on fighting our enemies in their backyard, prevent them from coming to the United States. And somewhere at some point, risk was assumed in the Americas. Assumptions were made that were false assumptions. And then those gaps were what? They were filled by who? By our near-peer competitors. However, we're starting to see a resurgence. We had Chinese fishing vessels off the coast of Chile. They were chased off by who? Chilean Navy. We have the Nimitz, just went around the Horn. Now it's off the coast of Argentina. Again, projection of power in the region. We're starting to see governments change in the Americas. We have Bolivia, we had Ecuador. We had others that were seemingly maybe shifting into a sphere we did not want it to go, like Panama and Dom Rep. They're starting to come back to where they need to be and where they should have been. So we're starting to see that come back because the president, the administration, has put what? Our nation's national security first, securing the homeland. And in order for us to secure the homeland, we need what? We need to secure our backyard. So this is what's going on right now. And that's just something that will continue to go on for the next years. We got a lot of ground to make up. It's not easy. And I can tell you from mid-2000s, I was chasing Hezbollah throughout Latin America, Panama, Belize, the tri-border area, me and my ODAs. Yep, so Margarita Island, so yes. And we're very much aware, but what's happening now is, as we continue to cut those ties from Latin America to Iran, they're finding themselves alone, and they're finding themselves unable to sustain themselves, which will make it a lot easier for our agencies to pick them up.
And I would add that another thing that's happened, and this relates to the question about hybrid warfare, is that between administrations, I think the United States benefited greatly from the clarity of difference between a Biden administration and the second Trump administration. And this Trump administration, literally from day one, has said that we are at war, we are under attack from an adversary, and in particular a chemical attack. If you read the National Drug Control Strategy, don't read all 195 pages, just read the first 8. And it will explain in very clear language that the United States is under a chemical assault, and we are taking wartime level casualties in terms of the number of deaths from overdoses. And so responding in the way that the Trump administration has, and protecting America and Americans first, not Europe or the Middle East first, it became a priority in the interregnum period, and has been implemented. I keep a list of things that have been done in the Western Hemisphere, and it's almost on a weekly basis. Something is happening from a document, strategy, visit, or other standpoint that advances America's interest here in the Western Hemisphere. And I think the selection of Marco Rubio as a Secretary of State is clearly a part of that. And I think he's doing an absolutely fabulous job. And the fact that he's double-handed as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor and wedding DJ, I mean, he's just doing terrific. He's one of the all-stars. I mentioned earlier that one of the best things that the administration has done is raise the commercial and economic interests of the nation higher. The other two things that I think this administration, even compared to the one in which I worked, has done better, picking people like Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, Sarah Carter at ONDCP, who speak clearly to the American people and who are not beholden to the bureaucracies that they need to change. And I think those are some of the changes, even from the first Trump administration, that make this one not only so different, but so much more effective than even the president's first administration. Did we have one more question in the back? Because we are, man, that filibuster just about ran out the clock.
One thought as an idea, since I know a lot of academics here, policy folks. So JIATF South, Joint Interagency Task Force South, by law, in U.S. Code 10 U.S.C. 124, the authorities are detection and monitoring for illicit narcotics coming towards the United States. Since then, Jayada South's been able to look omnidirectional, but I think more important is a legislative change that allows Jayada South to be a CTOC, Center of Excellence, a counter transnational organized criminal detection and monitoring, so they could look at illegal fisheries that are happening or anything other illicit activity on the water or in the air over the water. That would be huge. I've heard our law enforcement partners ask for that. Weapon smuggling. Right now, Jayada South can't act on that. They should be able to.
I'll give one C-story case of this. Mark and I at different times had a similar job in the Coast Guard Miami command, and one night I got a call from one of our ships. They had tracking and go fast across the coast of Panama, and they saw it. Their helicopter saw it throwing bales over the side, so it looked like a classic drug trafficking vessel. Give them the authority. They shoot out the engines. They stop the boat, pick up the people, start picking up bales out of the water in the dark. They pick up, I think it was 21 bales, and they cut them open to do the drug test, and it's not drugs. It's cash. $400,000 per bale, $8.4 million in U.S. cash. But had we suspected that it was cash, we wouldn't have had the legal authority to shoot the engines out to stop the boat. And that's the kind of narrowness of our policies that have constrained us from being as effective as we should be. This administration, I think, will open that up, give us those additional authorities. And again, America first, not America alone. The president definitely wants to work both on a multilateral and a bilateral basis. Basically, the operating agencies of the federal government now are allowed to care about whatever our partner nation cares about. If Guyana is concerned about illegal gold mining and the smuggling of gold, we can care about that. If there's timber, endangered species, illegal fishing, whatever it might be, we should be able to open up the aperture of what we care about to include what our neighbors care about and improve regional and hemispheric security that way. I'm getting the hook, so I appreciate everybody's patience as we talk through this. To our panelists, thank you very much. So for our audience, please thank our panelists for joining us, and I'm sure we'll have time to talk after.